Welcome everybody. My name is David Wood and it's my pleasure to chair London Futurists. At this stage of the meeting, I normally say a few words of introduction and then hand over to the main speaker or speakers who will be setting out their ideas and themes. But for today, it's going to be a bit different. Roughly once every 18 months or so on average at London Futurist meetings, I will offer some thoughts myself, and this is one such day. I'm going to hand over to myself wearing a different hat, which is one of the representatives of Transhumanist UK. Today's event is looking at an idea that some of us in Transhumanist UK, which I'll say more about shortly, have been discussing, is the idea that we can catalyze a change in how politics is done in the UK and elsewhere by means of a particular campaign, which is provisionally called Transhumanism 2024. And it revolves around the idea, only an idea at this stage. It's a big idea, it's an ambitious idea, and I'm loath to start it if it's not going to have a reasonable chance of some success. But the idea of campaigning in various mayoral elections in the UK in 2024, when they're next due to be held, including the London mayoral election. For a simple description of Transhumanism 24, it is this: steering technology for profound social progress. Now, the slogan will probably change in due course. This is here as a starter, but I think it's quite apt. Let's break it down. Steering technology for profound social progress recognizes that technology is about to change more and more aspects of our lives. How we work, how we play, how we're educated, how we keep healthy, how we interact with each other. Technology has already changed humanity in many ways, accelerating since the Industrial Revolution, and with each new wave of the Industrial Revolution, things accelerate more, and we're about to see more impact from what's sometimes called NBIC, nanotech, biotech, infotech, and cognotech, and we're still seeing accelerating trends indeed from earlier waves of previous parts of the Industrial Revolution. And this is going to change numerous aspects of city life as well. We need to get ahead of the technology and steer it in beneficial directions. We can't just rely on some supposedly innate good sense inside technology to do right and do good for humanity. We can't just rely either on some automatic market mechanisms, free market operations, which will somehow automatically ensure that technology leads to good and not for ill. Done well, if we do steer these new technological possibilities wisely, the city can experience profound social progress. But most politicians are currently distracted from these possibilities. Or if they do think about them, they often have a poor level of understanding. Why? These politicians are focusing on present-day issues. I don't want to diminish the importance of these present-day issues. There are plenty of issues in the UK politics and elsewhere that demand a lot of focus, but there is not enough attention being carved out for these very transformational near future ones. And if we don't anticipate them adequately as a group of citizens, failing to anticipate is, in many cases, anticipating to fail. We've got to change the conversation. So that's the idea of this campaign, elevating the discussion of these technological opportunities and risks by means of one party in the campaign focusing intensely on these issues, not being distracted into the present day issues, which are of course important, but we'll leave it for other parties to mainly focus on that, and we will keep drawing attention to issues that might sooner than people expect, supersede present-day issues in level of importance. And if one party focuses intensely on these issues, others will in due course need to respond. And we'll be very happy if these other parties steal or borrow or adapt our ideas. Why is this being thought about in connection with mayoral elections? It's because there is a different method of voting there. Rather than the first past the post, there is a supplementary vote system. At least that's what's happened in recent occasions. And each voter gets to express a preference for their first choice and their second choice. Now, if more than 50% of the first preferences goes to a single candidate, that candidate wins straight off, and there's no need for any transfers. But in case, which is likely, no candidate receives 50% of the first preferences, then there are transfers taking place. And only the first two candidates in this mechanism stay in the count, all the other ones drop out. And all the votes that were previously allocated to some of the other candidates, if their second choice are one of the two remaining candidates, it's handed over. And so there is less of a worry by electors about wasting their vote. They might think to themselves, hey, they quite like what the Transhumanist UK party is talking about, but they're loath to vote for us because they are especially fearful that another candidate might win, and therefore they'd prefer to give their first preference vote to who is actually their second or third or fourth preference, but somebody they think might beat the person that they particularly dislike becoming mayor. And so in many elections under the first past the post system, people are worried about wasting their first votes, but not in these votes. That's why. Why the name transhumanism? Well, I think it is a good word, and I'm going to defend this word. I think it's an accurate description of the possibilities enabled by new technology, which comes down to humans transcending ages-old limitations. Transcending limitations in our physical body, the fact that we are weak and feeble, especially as we grow old. We are prone to too many diseases. The technologies of biotech have already enhanced our average lifespan, doubled it over the last 200 years, and lots more can be done. We can enhance our thinking capabilities too. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, or sometimes Homo sapiens sapiens, the creatures who know that we know, but we are frequently, as well as being smart, we are smart stupid, and we are prone to all kinds of cognitive mistakes. This can be addressed by AI and transform how we think. We are rational beings, that we don't live for rationality. We live primarily for our feelings, for our emotional accomplishments, our levels of consciousness, but there are many limitations in that too, for evolutionary and other reasons, and that can be addressed by the forthcoming transformations in neurotech, sometimes also known as cognotech. And lastly, there's another set of limitations which new technology can, in principle, help us with, which is limitations in our social relationships. We humans are social species. No man is an island, to quote the poet John Donne. But a lot of our power dynamics are dysfunctional. There is lots of abuse of power, lots of deception, and we need to be transcending these limitations as well. So I say it's time to promote the T word, transhumanism, to defend it, to challenge misunderstandings of it. It's not a word for the elite or for a weird group. It's a philosophy from which everyone can benefit, as in the phrase transhumanism for all. It's not closed-minded, it's not a cult, it's not a monoculture, it supports diversity, it supports lots of morphological freedom. And it's about people being free to make the choices they wish to make, truly free, without the limitations I've noted. It's about humans being able to be truly creative, truly alive, vital, and very importantly, it's about humans being in charge, not surrendering to technology. It's about human agency so that we can reach these transhuman possibilities. Well, that's quite general. In order to campaign, we need some specific policies, and I'm going to outline these before I hand over to some members of the audience who in some cases have got some prepared remarks, in other cases I'm sure will want to just speak on the fly, speak on the hoof, as it were. I'm going to offer 15 possible policies, which broadly break down into 3 categories: anticipating and taking advantage of AI and automation. I won't read them out now because I'm going to have one slide on each. Anticipating and taking advantage of biotech and neurotech. These are biological and cognitive transformations. And then there's a set of policies to do with what arguably matters most. And we'll come to these too. And as you listen to these policies, I'll be looking for your feedback. Which of the policies do you particularly like? And if there is only 3 or 4 to be presented on a leaflet, which would you pick as being the ones that you think have the most possibility of resonating with significant members of the population and actually causing changes in what some of the other parties will say? Are there policies here that you would remove and say, interesting idea, don't mention it? Are there policies you would want to add, things that aren't on my list? And I'll say here, I'm not looking for general partisan policies, things that might be characterized as being right-wing or left-wing. I'm much more interested in things that could be characterized as up-wing, to use the terminology of pioneering transhumanist thinker F.M. Estefanderi. So ideally, these should be some sense transhumanist distinctive policies, but ones that can still resonate with significant parts of the population. You may like some of the policies but wish them to be changed or reworded. You may have marketing skills that will improve. I'm interested in that feedback. Or perhaps you quite like the underlying idea, but you would prefer to take a different approach altogether. Well, I'm interested in that too. And I'm also interested in how you think people might be able to help this campaign, how you might be able to help this campaign. So that's got started. Now let me run through fairly quickly each of these 15. And the first one recognizes that getting everyone online was at first a kind of a strange idea when it was first mooted, but it is now regarded by all parties as basically almost a human right. But that's not enough. It's only the start of our digital empowerment. And we are starting to see AI-powered personal digital assistants, search agents, if you like, but things like Siri or Cortana or Alexa or Google Assistant. And these should be on the side of citizens. Citizens who use them, they can be directed in ways that allow them to select things more quickly and more efficiently, to cost saves, and more generally empower them. But what often happens in the moment is that many of these online systems, distractors, intimidators, constrainers, or manipulators. So what's going to be very important in people feeling really comfortable with these systems is that they understand how they work to an extent, or they're confident that enough people understand how they work and support them via democratic oversight, rather than these systems being operated by opaque mega corporations. Now, I have nothing against corporations. They have a great role to play in all kinds of innovations. I'm not even against mega corporations. Mega corporations can do mega things. But what the problem is if there is no accountability, if they have a monopoly power, if they are pursuing things out of their own goals, which are misaligned with the goals of the citizens. So opaqueness must go. Related to this is a change from talking about smart cities, in which there is lots of data being gathered and analyzed and decisions being taken on that account, to one that we might instead call a trusted city. Being a smart city is not enough. Now, I like this word smart. It was important in my professional career as we envisioned and designed and implemented smartphones, then known as smartphones, one word rather than 2 phones. So it's been very important to me professionally, but being smart is not enough. It's got to be something that citizens can trust, as I say. There's nothing wrong with having surveillance systems around the city. identifying which roads need repair, where there are potholes, identifying where there are unusual bunches of traffic, which should be resolved, identifying where there is pollution, where there might be crime happening, or possibly even a terrorist incident. But this got to be done in ways that citizens can trust. So prioritizing openness and fairness, respecting legitimate privacy concerns, so that instances of crime and terrorism can indeed be reduced and resources deployed more efficiently without waste. It's a similar set of remarks about automation. Automation transforming how we work. Many people are in two minds about automation. They are fearful that automation is going to remove their possibility of working or leave them working in a poorer, less skilled job than before. I say instead, we should welcome automation on the whole, welcome it wherever it makes lives safer, wherever it reduces work that is in various ways back-breaking or soul-destroying, or where it enables reductions in the costs of things that are important for good qualities of life. But there will be impacts on people's work, and we do therefore need to reconfigure our social safety net. The one that we've had in place currently assumes that most people will spend the majority of their adult life working. That is probably no longer going to be the case. I'm not going to simply say, hey, we need UBI. I think UBI, as is often advocated, is by no means sufficient, and in some ways it's too much for what is needed. But something we might call UBI 2.0, details still to be worked out, might be at least part of this revised social safety net. Automation and AI won't just change how we work, it will change how we do politics, how we discuss together, how we reach collective decisions. So indeed, AI and automation can uplift the practice of democracy. To be clear, this is not saying we'll give over control to AI and AI is going to make decisions on our behalf, but rather it's decisions made by people in consultation, facilitated by AI, perhaps even advised by AI. Now, there is a lot of progress recently in some parts of the world with successful citizens' assemblies. More can be done here, especially when they are facilitated by good online software systems. And I believe Tony Zarneski, who will be speaking later, has more to say about this, and I thoroughly support that idea. So let's get these systems transparent, and it will accelerate reaching deep agreement on the best ideas wherever their source, and less partisan divisiveness, more constructive collaboration. Politicians for many decades have been focusing on increasing the GDP, the gross domestic product. And that's been important because on the whole, the more vigorous and vital activity there is in the economy, the more goods there are to go around to meet individuals' needs. But it's by no means a complete measurement of human well-being. And the policy here is to advocate an increased focus on something that is provisionally called the IHSF, the Index of Human and Social Flourishing. Rather than focusing on the total financial value of goods and services exchanged, we'll look at things like the requirements for a good quality of life coming down in price. That will be a progress rather than a decline. So cheaper, good quality accommodation, cheaper, good quality education. And this should also measure the problems in society where more citizens feel like they're being left behind against their will, or any of the other landmines that I speak about in some of my other writings, the existential risks that might lurk undetected or only partially understood before going horribly wrong. We should be measuring the canary signals, as it were, for these landmines ahead of time and adding them into the index for human and social flourishing. Now let's move to things more in the green or biotech or cognitive areas. All parties nowadays say they should move towards being carbon neutral. Some of them talk about this as a sacrifice. Most people realize that it can be actually a net positive, not just that we will have less carbon emissions, but we could have better quality of life. So I'm not against growth, so long as it's green growth adequately measured without losing track of the externalities, which the GDP fails to measure, and which often companies fail to measure when they proudly state their financial results. So let's get that measured properly, and we can indeed go extremely green and have good quality of life if we accelerate taking extensive analysis of next generation green technologies. So better buildings, better transport systems, higher quality of life in many ways. In terms of cheaper, more effective healthcare, the most important thing to do is to intervene early and to intervene in ways that preserves people's youthful vitality for longer. So the proposal here, it's a well-known transhumanist idea that significantly more funding should be provided to develop and deploy widely treatments that keep bodies and minds youthful and vigorous, taking advantage of biorejuvenation technologies, which are still at an early stage of development today, but which could go much faster if there was more funding made available. This would prevent the buildup over time of the biological damage of aging and will allow earlier treatment and less serious cases of chronic illnesses from which most people in most parts of the world die nowadays: cancer, dementia, heart failure, stroke, diabetes, or immune failures, such as leads to death by COVID. So in this vision of the not so distant future, people will be as healthy and as engaged in all aspects of life at quite late chronological ages, perhaps even 90, as when they are aged today quite young. This will make something called the longevity dividend real. It's the vision that by spending some amount of money, quite a lot actually, in this rejuvenation biotechnology, we will gain back much, much more money than is spent in reduced healthcare costs. Now, we're not just talking about improving people's physical health, we have to look at improving people's mental health. And this can be done by a number of, we might loosely call them transhumanist technologies, neurotechnologies, psychoactive substances. In the UK today, we have outdated or ill-informed laws which are overly preventing various nootropic and psychedelic drugs being used in ways that would be supervised and informed. We're not talking about a free-for-all, just as we don't say anybody can get on the roads and drive at any speed in any vehicle at any age without any supervision or any training. In the same way, there should be constraints on these treatments, but with these constraints, there is possibilities for much richer health. Many aspects of mental vitality can be boosted by psychoactive substances and also by other AI-powered neurotechnologies such as helmets or other means to gently change the electricity or other electromagnetism in the brain. Has the potential to improve mental creativity, make us less egocentric, make us more rational, improve our interpersonal relationships, improve the way in which we carry out democratic decisions without being so tribal and partisan, more open to reaching across the aisle, as it were. Related to this is selectively embracing genetic editing, which I see is moving forward encouragingly in the UK in the last few weeks. Techniques such as CRISPR have the potential to edit human genomes to remove causes of rare genetic diseases and to enable numerous other improvements. Now, it's not going to change all aspects of human nature. We need to keep an open mind as to what's possible and what's not possible, but we should be open-minded. We should be open-minded to exploring viable applications, and when they are found safe, and provided we are keeping a careful, vigilant eye on how things are actually working out, legislative barriers against their use should be removed. And this discussion is currently hampered by too much closed-mindedness, too much ideology of various sorts, and we need to free ourselves from that by having better practice of scientific process throughout the country, greater respect for data, and that applies indeed for nearly all of these policies. And last in this column, the idea to incentivize the adoption of cultivated meat, that is, meat from non-sentient sources. Incentives should be provided to encourage people to switch their diets away from meat created by slaughtering enormous numbers of sentient animals. Instead, we should prefer meat that's sometimes called cultured or clean, but I believe the increasingly prevailing term for this is cultivated meat, which is in many ways healthier. It's better for the environment, it uses less water, has less greenhouse gas emissions, and it avoids killing sentient animals. If there are suitable incentives, the costs can decrease rapidly. And by the way, this is in line with a grander transhumanist vision, not just championing the well-being of human consciousness, but championing the well-being of all sentience. Which takes me to the final column of proposals. A city that is a champion, that is attractive to these new technologies behind what can be called the transhumanist and cosmist revolutions. The city should be one that innovators want to come to work and live in. The ones who are building technologies to enable dramatic uplifts in the human conditions, including technologies to transcend ages-old limitations that constrain us biologically and also constrain us by gravity to terra firma. So we should align with humanity's grander aspirations to journey in due course to new levels of both inner and outer space. And we should, of course, prioritize those innovators who will have a significant chance of radical positive impact, but who have appropriate safety measures in place. We should uphold what transhumanists call morphological and social freedom. New technology is bringing significant new possibilities in self-expression and group expression, not just new fashions in clothing, not just new jewelry, not just new makeup, but all kinds of possibilities of body modifications, biohacking, alternative genders, new options for childbearing and child raising, and new structures for social collaboration, sometimes called free cities, and so forth. No unnecessary restrictions should be placed on consenting, well-informed citizens carrying out such experiments on themselves. The mere fact that other people might say, yuck, or this is strange, or this is weird, is not sufficient. Of course, there's a lot of devil in the details here, what restrictions are unnecessary and what are necessary, who counts as consenting and as well informed, but the direction of travel, I think, is clear. One aspect of this freedom should be the human right to cryonic preservation. Citizens should be supported if, while sound in mind, they express and document a desire for the cryonic preservation of their body, or possibly just their head or their brain, on the point of legal death. This would still, of course, need to be funded by the person themselves, but there should be no unnecessary barriers. There should be smooth relations established between the National Health Services and other medical systems and the providers of cryonic services, who should be welcomed in whenever a patient wishes this. And we should indeed explore further selective support for what's sometimes called cryoeuthanasia, which is euthanasia with a view to enabling a better cryopreservation. If someone is dying of a degenerating brain, they might prefer to be cryopreserved before their brain degenerates and makes the task of eventual reanimation harder. This is, again, a tricky area, but I think the direction of travel should be made clear as well. Now, whilst we look at these technologies of what we call the fourth industrial revolution, NBIC, we should not lose track of the possibility that a fifth industrial revolution, as it were, might come to us even quicker, which is sometimes called the technological singularity. It involves an AI breakthrough in which it is more capable in all aspects of thinking than humans. Whereas today's AI and even tomorrow's AI, even the AI that I've been talking about up to now, will be limited in what it can do. While we might get at some stage sudden self-reinforcing acceleration in the power of AI, and the city needs to be prepared to take decisive action to steer any such development in a beneficial direction rather than an unguided direction. So any groups, whether they're commercial groups, academic groups, military groups, or otherwise, that are developing AI that have the potential to reach AGI, artificial general intelligence, should be severely restricted or penalized if they fail to pay sufficient attention to safety requirements. Again, I say, if we don't anticipate this well, it's basically anticipating that it's going to go badly. Finally, what underpins nearly all of this is a raising of the general caliber of awareness of many things that are currently not properly covered in education. And so the last, but maybe in some ways the first in importance, is a transformation in education system that will help citizens of all ages to prepare to handle the risks and take advantage of the opportunities of a society that is changing rapidly in ways that are difficult to anticipate, but that doesn't mean we should give up trying. Society that is ultra diverse, not just people from different religions or different ethnicities, but increasingly there will be more people who are on the way to transformation as transhumanists, and there will be people who are half AIs in some sense. So let's prepare for that ultra diversity. Let's cope with increasing irrationality and destructive tendencies. We have more knowledge than ever before, but in some measures we have forces leading us to more irrationality, more people who make money by deliberately spreading false news, not because they believe the false news themselves, but because they have found out that they can get lots of clicks from it. We're also living in a society that has lost much of its confidence in traditional moral principles, but that does not mean, or should not mean, that anything goes. We need to help people to rethink through moral and ethical choices from a transhumanist framework rather than just a conventional, traditional humanist framework. We should look to grander possibilities in the future rather than imagining that we're trying to get back to some perceived golden age from the past. And yes, we're in some ways approaching a state of post-scarcity, which changes many of the calculations about economics. And we're approaching, at some stage, a state of post-work, which again changes our calculation. So this means more attention to lots of subjects. STEM, yes, but many other subjects, as written in the vital syllabus, which you can find online. So these are the policies. Just a few questions on practical issues. If this is to go ahead, how would it look? What would it take? Well, one thing it will take is some signatures, a candidate to be on the ballot for Mayor of London, and there are similar conditions elsewhere in other metropolitan cities. They need 10 signatures from each of the 32 London boroughs and from the City of London. That is 330 signed supporters, at least, from these different regions. Now, these people who sign aren't necessarily committing to actually vote for the Transhumanist UK, but they're saying they think the candidate deserves to be on the ballot. So that's a bit of work that has to be done. Incidentally, for the last elections, the 2020 elections, which were delayed because of COVID to 2021, there was only 2 signatures needed from each of these 33 regions, but likely by 2024 it will be back. Another barrier is that the candidate for mayor needs to lodge a deposit of £10,000, which will be refunded if the candidate wins at least 5% of the first preference votes. Well, I can tell you in the 2021 elections in London, there were 20 candidates. How many of these 20 candidates do you think got their deposit back? Let's look at these 2020 elections. The first 5 were Labour, Conservative, Green, Lib Dem and Independents. Labour had 40%, got its deposit back. Conservative 35%, Green 7.8%, but the Lib Dems and all the others failed to make that threshold. So it's very likely we're looking at waving goodbye to that £10,000. And by the way, a lot more expense in travelling to collect signatures and lots of other publicity. So what then should we look to for success. It's unrealistic to think that a Transhumanist UK party member will be mayor in 2024. Very unlikely, but we can look at some other possibilities. We can look, by the way, at that independent who got 2% of the vote. You probably don't know his name, Nico Omilana. He was how old? He was 23 years old. How come he got such a significant vote? He was a well-known YouTube video maker, sometimes described as a YouTube prankster, with 3.4 million subscribers, which shows what the Transhumanist UK campaign might do. We will be successful if we get repeated, serious media coverage, that we will be invited not just once as a kind of token gesture, but we will be invited back several times. Hey, these guys had something interesting to say. And the coverage won't be gentle. There'll be hard, demanding questions, but at least it will be respectful. That will be a success. More generally, improved public understanding and appreciation of transhumanism, so that when people are asked what is transhumanism, they won't just say what. They'll have some idea. Oh yes, it's about steering technology to allow humans to transcend limitations. We need a slightly snazzier phrase, but people will be able to say something like that. But in the end, it is about the policies. In the end, it's about getting our policies discussed, understood, and adopted in various ways by the other parties, not just as a token gesture, but without subsequent loss of attention. So that would count as a success. And that might be a springboard for a transhumanist mayor in 2028, perhaps. So a reminder on what I'm looking for. I'm looking for which of these policies you would prioritize, which you would remove, other ones you might add that are transhumanist distinctive, not just out and out left wing or out and out right wing. So if you have a strong case, of course, we'll review it openly. Which policy you might reword or change if you have a different approach altogether, or how you think people might help this campaign. So I will put this slide up again, but I will then stop sharing. And at this stage, I'm going to start inviting people gradually to join me as panelists and provide feedback. Let me find the first person who put his hand up, actually several days ago, Tony Zarneski. Thank you so much for being bold enough to offer some response. You are the managing director of a think tank, Sustensis, and you have many ideas on using artificial intelligence, using technology generally to improve the caliber of governance. I'll let you explain them by yourselves. I'll let you take over the screen and share anything that you would like. Tony.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, David, for such a prescriptive presentation on what we need to do, and perhaps more importantly on highlighting the main points about transhumanism, what transhumanism is about. I would like to begin where you have ended, on a practical side, how to win mayoral elections by promoting transhumanism. And David has set up his goals relatively, say, on a slower side, not demanding, that even if that candidate of ours or candidates of ours do not win the elections, what will we do? We will promote transhumanism in the most benevolent way, I think, to a much wider audience. And as David mentioned, the mainstream, let's take it like that, politicians would adopt it in their manifesto. That would be a real success of that campaign. So let me start with a strategy. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, are we a movement or a party? I have 9 questions here to ponder. Is it a one city campaign, London 2024, or multiple cities, which may have different dates? Is our candidate or candidates, are they going to be selected, elected, or self-selected? And how and by whom this decision will be made? Should it be a current or a former politician or independent person, one of us? Will we need any politician support? For instance, Tony Blair's Institute, Keir Starmer. By the way, anybody that was listening to the Wednesday's Keir Starmer speech will have noticed how much time and space he devoted to artificial intelligence and technology and science. Amazing, absolutely. Irrespective of what you think about the party. Rory Stewart, a former Conservative minister who was running for London mayor, and who probably would be an asset in such a campaign. Anna Soubry, another Conservative MP, and so on. I'm just only highlighting some MPs. Will we form alliances or will we be going alone? Well, we should identify competitors and how to deal with them. That's the nature of politics. Identify the sponsors. Is it companies like John Lewis, Electoral Reform Society, Google and Microsoft? But here's a warning that we have to be careful, because if we select some companies, the opposition or the competitors or the media may say, well, these companies have an interest to support us because they can see some profits in the future. Now, what are the resources needed? I would start with the campaign board, which should have a clearly defined roles, such as finance manager, resource manager, public relations, image and communicating manager, media coordinator. Then logistics. Where do you need an office? Where do you be located? Or perhaps we'll deal with just the virtual office. Financial resources, crowdfunding and sponsors, universities, charities, and so on. IT resources, AI specialists. After all, if we promote AI-related technologies, we should have AI specialists in the campaign. Campaign supporters. I would think that universities are our prime source of such campaign supporters. A-level students, perhaps. Social media, that David mentioned in his last slide, how important they are. And access to traditional media, radio, press, and TV. Let me now move into the scope of the campaign. I would split it into two areas. The big picture area, explaining, for instance, what transhumanism is, which is very important for the people not to be put away, but too much jargon and unknown terms. For instance, we should communicate it. David has his own definition. I'm just giving you something to ponder, that transhumanism prepares societies for adaptation to entirely new lifestyle enabled by advanced technology, something like that. The main point is to make these terms clear and understood by laymen. So we should spend less time on explaining the big picture, but much more time on how we are deliver the policies that are derived from that big picture and identify the clear benefits. For instance, answering the question, how soon, how much, for whom? Like translating one of David's statements, from everyone on the line to everyone empowered. Could be translated into spend 4 days with the family, working 3 days in the office, or transform a dying high street into a multi-purpose, thriving community hub. I think we should spread also the short-term and long-term policies, like the short-term policy, and David mentioned that. And giving an example, an advanced AI assistant in every school by the next election, or in every surgery. And if you do that, we should immediately, for each policy, specify how much it would cost, what are the benefits, what is the implementation date, who will be affected, and David mentioned this as well, the implications, good and bad, because in almost every innovation has a downside. So we have to immediately say how we are going to cope with that downside. And then the longer term policies, ones like carbon neutrality by 2030. And believe it or not, this is exactly what Leeds wants to do. And for each such policy, we should also estimate the benefits, timescales, who will be affected, and its implications. Communication will be crucial to electoral success, in my view. And I would emphasize 3 points here. That we need to communicate to the electorate in non-technical terms, use known terms if possible, and repeat the new terms and concepts like transhumanism many, many times, and David has reiterated it as well. And then we should perhaps identify the ways with which we will communicate with our supporters. I'm talking about people that will actively support us, not just vote for us, but during the campaign or over the next 3 years will be somehow engaged with it. So we need to present a clear vision, what we want to achieve, and the benefits that we want to gain. We should offer seminars, recommend books and articles to such people. In my view, the target audience should be universities, climate change supporters, and perhaps NGOs. Now, we should measure our success somehow. So if we want to differ from any other candidates, we have to have very clear success criteria so that if we win that mayor election, that the next election will be easier to win, because we would say, this is what we promised, this is the success criteria we had, here we are, you can test it. David suggested a flourishing index of social and human progress. I'm not saying that it's not relevant or so, but what I would try to point out that we should use as plain language as possible and as many known terms or concepts as there are in use, because we will be having too many new things and people will perhaps be a little bit disinterested in it. So my suggestion would be to use the existing UN's World Happiness Index, which is this is essentially the same what David is proposing. By the way, UK rank in the World Happiness Index fell from 15 to 17 in 2020. For comparison, Finland has been at the top of that index for 4 years running. All the Scandinavian countries are in the first 10 ranks. So the question is that perhaps we could copy some policies of these countries and cities and embrace them in our manifesto. GDP, I think, might still be used as a comparison, but not as the main one. I would think that measures such as percentage out of poverty or percentage of A-level graduates or increased lifespan may be of more interest. Now, David mentions citizens' assemblies. I am a very strong promoter of it, and there is a whole plethora of new terms there, but I will try not to engage you too much today. Just to emphasize that this is needed for continuous citizens' engagement, and a lot of things is happening. Very briefly, a citizens' assembly is a gathering of up to 200 people for a few weekends, 3-4 weekends. They are all randomly selected, and they arrive at some policies which hopefully the government will implement. One of the best examples is the Irish Citizens' Assembly of 2012, which has immensely changed Ireland in just 2 years. So such an assembly can have profound implications on the quality of our lives. Right now, we have the Conference on the Future of Europe. I doubt that many people have heard about that. That started in May and will continue till March. And it engages MPs from the European Parliament, from the Council and the European Commission, but also crucially 108 randomly selected citizens from all European Union countries. And that is a model that we should be adopting for our city mayors after he has won the election. We should engage supporters, perhaps by an online consensus debating. I don't want to go into the details about that, because this is my penultimate slide, but I'm mentioning it, that we can make it a unique debating environment where we can combine measuring the support of proposed policies before the election for building into the manifesto, and perhaps spreading the news in the press and media, how many people, what is the percentage of the population that would support the policies that we are promoting. Sustensis has built a subsidiary website called EuroAgora, which actually underpins the consensus debating. It can be used for debating complex subjects like politics. Currently, EuroAgora is aligned with the Conference on the Future of Europe, one of the 10 themes, which is called democracy. But it can be reset to debate any subject like science, climate change, or mayoral elections. And that's what I would propose. It would also show how national politics and citizens' engagement can be reignited. So how it works, very briefly, you have a statement of the policy, like here, citizen assembly is more represented in the electoral system. This is the statement. You can agree, disagree, and or ignore it, saying that I don't know. But crucially, you can also add your own statement or modify the original policy, saying, yes, I would vote for it, provided that this is slightly rephrased. And this is the crucial difference between any polling system known. So what you get after those added modifications, that you arrive at the initial position, how the participants vote or support an initial policy. And after a while, perhaps weeks or even months, you see that the position has changed, and the final position may be like this. So this is the biggest group, and this is a smaller group. So what you want to achieve is a 60% majority. This is my last slide. So the original statement would be voted, say 60% of the votes are needed. People have amended those statements. And as you can see, the majority, at least 60% of the participants supported those 4 statements. So if such an approach is used in the mayoral election campaign, it could then be adapted for town hall citizens' assembly. Obviously, we would need volunteers to manage the debates and IT, AI to manage the website. All the details are on the Agora website. I think it will be in the chat. If not, then I'll do it right now. And I'll email you my email address in the chat. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tony. Lots of very important, good questions there. Many practical questions there too. Now, I'm open to inviting more people in a minute to offer probably shorter comments than Tony has made. Tony has a chance to think through. And you can raise your hand in the panel if you wish, or you can ask some questions. But for the time being, I want to offer at least some responses to some of Tony's questions. Now, if I was a traditional politician, I would want to give the impression that, hey, I had good answers ready for all these questions. No need to worry about it. Everything's well thought through. It's all fully costed. I'm not such a politician. I have to say that I have thought about some of these issues and I have tentative answers. And it's still early days. And this will only work if there are a whole bunch of people who are able to provide complementary skills, and we can do this together. In terms of this being a single city campaign or multiple cities, Well, it's as much as the movement as a whole is able to inspire. Each separate city will require extra costs, extra resources. If there is a method found that can raise funds, such as crowdfunding, as has been mentioned, if there are sponsors who can come forward, whose money can be accepted without in some ways damaging or risking the integrity of the campaign, if that can happen in one city, somebody else in Leeds may say, hey, I'll be happy to fund at least some of the campaign in Leeds. So that can scale up to the extent that there are resources eager to help. And each new city will have its own flavour. There will be some things that are different in Leeds or in Edinburgh than in London, of course, but there should be a lot of reuse. And so the more people that get involved, in some sense, there will be benefits of scale. Would we be open to an ex-politician or a current politician being nominated? Well, in principle, yes. If Rory Stewart or David Miliband or Anna Soubry goes away on holiday and reads my book, Vital Foresight, or watches some of the online material about transhumanism and says, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. I would like to spend the next part of my life promoting these ideas. Then we are not going to chase them away at all. We will be very keen on their connections, their skills, their existing proficiency. So there are no decisions at all about candidates or even decisions about how candidates will be chosen. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I'm open to suggestions as to how this should be done. Of course, I will want, as the longest term co-founder and treasurer as the Transhumanist UK, I will want to maintain some monitoring of this. I would not want somebody to come in who had actually quite different personal desires and they would take the campaign off in an alien direction, although first implying that they were interested. And in terms of how can we be organized to compete against well-oiled party machines? Well, I don't think we can be well enough organized to win in 2024. That's too much of an ask. But I do again point to many of the runners-up in the 2021 election. I pointed to the fifth candidate who had 2%. The votes go down a lot less than that. But there are many in between who were small groups of people who managed to get a lot of online support. So we would be looking to use our online skills. We would be looking indeed to take advantage of people with social media skills, with marketing prowess, and with access to some of the traditional media as well. I'm being advised that many in the traditional media would be interested, at least on a one-off basis, in looking at some of the, quote, interesting alternative candidates, and that would be our chance to do well enough in such an event to be invited back at least an extent.
David, may I just comment very briefly on your last point, organization? Can we do it? The answer is, look at Macron, what he did in just 10 months, coming almost from nowhere to winning the presidential election in France with just one statement, En Marche. He ignited, first of all, the younger people, and he won the presidency. He couldn't win traditional seats in the regional elections, but he did it on a national scale. Obama did exactly the same. He said, we can do it. And he gained $710 million just by subscriptions and by social media campaign. So I think we have some examples to follow, and I think it is perfectly doable.
So there are lessons we can learn from both Obama and Trump and Macron. Macron, of course, had the advantage of being a well-known French politician before. He had been the finance minister under the previous president, if I remember right. So, and he knew how the levers of power worked, and he was not representing things that would be seen as too much of an outsider. He was reformulating some of the mainstream of the French political discussion. I don't want to diminish his accomplishments. It was remarkable, but he had an advantage we don't yet have. Obama was an outsider in many ways too, but he was a candidate for one of the main parties, so that was his advantage. And likewise for Trump, he became the candidate for one of the main parties. I don't think that's within our grasp, but I mean, the alternative way in which we are successful will be if other parties pick up our ideas and run with them. So I might say in 2024, well, we didn't do well in terms of the number of votes, but look, these other parties have taken many of our key ideas. They are talking much more seriously about solving health issues by, first of all, addressing aging. They are accelerating neurotechnologies for better emotional states and mental health. And they're doing all these other things as well. So that would be a success too. But I don't think we can rely on that happening unless we are also part of the discussion, putting things forwards. I don't think the other parties would have adopted so many green policies in the UK unless there had been a Green Party that was taking at least some votes away, especially in the EU elections when in, I think, 2015, was it? They did pretty well. Maybe I've got the dates wrong, but the last but one, they did, one of the last elections, they did well.
Perhaps we should talk about the organizing this board, campaign board. I'm pretty open-minded how it should be done, but I think there should be a team that will be managing the campaign. Perhaps managing board is too grandiose term, but we need a team of people that will be engaged almost day by day in the very few months before the election and to some extent over the next 3 years to make this campaign successful. So perhaps we should achieve, at least by the end of this meeting, that there will be some people volunteering to join that, let's say, virtual team for the time being.
So we have a National Executive Committee for Transhumanist UK, but it's moribund, I have to say. There are a number of people who were quite active in the past, but because nothing much was happening, that we haven't met for a long time. And some people may no longer be interested, others may join us. But that's only a very small starting point. And I do share your view that we need to invite new people to come on board without necessarily making a long-term commitment. And some of the mechanisms you've suggested, some online discussions, would be a good vehicle for that to happen. So my success criteria for this event is that there's enough interest expressed, either by people live in the discussion now or by people watching the recording on YouTube, which would be an order of magnitude more, maybe 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more in due course. In that case, some of them committing to at least explore together more seriously will be a step forwards in the meantime. David, what would you like to suggest? Maybe introduce yourself for people who don't know you, if you wish, or you can remain relatively anonymous.
Okay, I'll put my mask back on here. No, it's okay. Thank you. Hi, I'm David Appleyard from Norfolk, based in Norfolk. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. Our bandwidth isn't too clever and the weather's bad. But just a couple of points. First of all, I'm so refreshed by the fact that this whole conversation, this whole discussion is being held at all. Many of the things, some of the things I've been reading in Vital Foresight have been individually on a small basis, if you like, and things I've talked to businesses about. I've been previously involved in helping businesses transition to the use of more technology and a digital era, and particularly in South Africa and places like that. And it's been very successful, but I've been very frustrated overall with things like the society debate and our politics is still held on, well, what I, in broad terms, consider to be such an old-fashioned media basis. And all forms of mass media are powerful, whether it's the internet or the television. They shouldn't be sort of cast aside, you know, one for the other, as people often have done in the past. But they need to be used a lot more thoughtfully as tools. I think politics today is totally ineffective in terms of the general population's engagement. And I do believe the point that Tony made earlier and that you reinforced, David, regarding how Barack Obama, an example I've used myself to clients before, and Macron was something I hadn't thought of, but you're quite right, Tony, is a great way of hauling together the power of social media to get a following in a rapid space of time. And we see the power that corporations use on influencers just to sell products or dream up new ideas. And they can be instant, they can be overnight. I mean, whether you're selling a, music or a pop record or, a tube of lipstick, and we can certainly take it much further than that. So I genuinely believe that but then I see that in politics, we're still sticking to the old plodding ways. We tick boxes with pencils every 5 years here in England. We walk down to the village hall and say, can I have a pencil? This one's broken, please. I mean, it is almost unbelievable. So I actually think that's an advantage. That's a way in for us in many ways, without casting aside the power of what could become the use of television, because we'll need exposure, we need debates, we need to go and sit in front of Emily Maitlis on Newsnight more than once. We need to, I agree with Tony's point that all political movements, when they arose in the 19th, 20th centuries or whatever it might be, did it by regularly repeating 2 or 3 key messages and being regularly exposed. And I think the first thing to do is distill and establish what our 2 or 3 key messages can be. And that's the way we'll establish the sections of the population that could build up the 60% that we would like to vote for us in the mayoral elections. We need to start almost backward engineering it, saying we need to be there. We therefore need these kind of people to do this, to do that. We can draw on these resources, this idea, etc. Look, I'm just, as the Americans say, spitballing. I mean, I haven't got a prepared speech here, but I also think that things like the use of, which you cover in Vital Foresight, things like the use of AI systems will be critical. And I understand that the power of things like Alexa could be massive to us. At the moment, I personally, even though I'm involved in technology and promoting it, really don't trust things like Alexa, and I won't have one. Thank you very much. I have plenty of friends who do, because I don't know where the information's actually going until I see a report in, The Guardian or on Newsnight or something that tells me that actually Facebook have been using all your information to feed Cambridge Analytica. And they're not just this week, but for the past 4 years. And then that's where the danger lies, I think, in that people are beginning to mistrust technology. And that's something we can help repair. But I'm not yet sure how if we use external resources like Alexa and Facebook, how we control what goes into those elements in terms of what's then curated to come out of the other side. So I'm really just putting these things up. I'm talking for far too long, so I'll shut up soon. The other thing I do think quickly, though, there's been a lot of nonsense talked about things like 5G and smart cities and how good they can be for rural villages. And I actually rather agree with you that these things could be forces for good. In fact, we're just going to need them soon. We don't have enough, as it were, feet on the ground just to look after people or see when things are going wrong or whatever. But by the same token, if we're not careful about how that information is curated or controlled or simply, policed, looked after so that it's not driven into the wrong hands, which can even include the police, by the way, as we know from recent events on the television. So I'm not protecting the status quo at all. I do think that the original vision of people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, a computer on every desk, education in the whole world, will bring this broad mass of humanity, were still wonderful ideas and still are. But I do think it's been rather distorted in many ways, simply by the misuse of capitalism, which is not actually a system I'm against. I don't think it's particularly perfect, but I do think it's a system which impels people along, which gives them desire, which sets self-interest up as well as how can you put it, collective interests, because they need to be addressed. We can talk collectively, but in the end, many people will still look at something and think, yeah, but what's in it for me? It's all right, talking about we'll have a better education system. What does that matter to me? Are you going to reduce my tax next year if we get a better education system? Or, allow me to drive my car again? Now you want me to ban using my car? 5 years ago, the British government was trying to sell people diesel cars. I mean, absolute madness compared to, so things change and distort. So We need to engage people at a level that says, we're not here just to come up with an idea, stick it down your throat till you vote for us. For the first time in political life, we're going to let the patterns and the pieces of your thinking that work join to our pieces of thinking that works and make the bits that work for all of us. If we can do that, then we can have an evolving method of looking after ourselves and looking after our future. It's not the planet that we've got to save. The planet will exist without us. It's ourselves we need to save. And we need to, I think, do anything at this stage which will help us to do that. Forgive me if I've taken up too much time. Thank you.
Well, you have spoken a great deal of good sense. I don't think there's anything you said that I take issue with, and you point out many important factors that need to be weighed up in this discussion. We do need to work on distilling a small number of key messages so that everybody knows what these offers are, these proposals are. We do need to look at using new communications methods more wisely, and politics that is more than just going and getting a pencil and filling in a form in the voting box. There is actually a lot of startups in London who have explored various ideas, sometimes called polytech or govtech. They haven't got that far often, but there are movements that have tried to offer more reliable community knowledge, community ideas to electors. So there are things that we can take advantage of. There are practical alliances, there are movements, businesses, communities that might be willing to work with us to make this vision of a 21st century super democracy more viable. In terms of 5G and so on and Norfolk, I do have to mention this has been very city focused necessarily because it's talking about a place where there are alternative votes systems being used, which are the mayoral elections. But of course, there are implications of technology for communities as well. And I was, maybe about 2 years ago now, I did an interview with somebody else from Norfolk, Julian Snape, who, as it happens, is one of the national executive members of the Transhumanist UK on smart rural communities.
I know Julian, by the way. Yeah, good.
Great. So that's fine. I'll come back to you in due course, Tony. Gordon or Brian, would either of you like to come off mute and move our conversation along, or push it in a different direction if you think it's appropriate?
David, I'll make a couple of comments if it will help.
Please do.
A little bit of background for the other participants. I've been laboring in the engineering educational field for over 65 years, so you can get a little bit of taste of how old I might be. Let me say that I think this is an important point. And I was originally attracted to the programs that David had actually run prior to this one, in particular his book. And the comment I made, the chat comment I made, is simply that we are now at an inflection point in the history of our planet, I do believe. We're suffering from a status which is based on a century, at very least, of perhaps bad decisions along the way. And David, in his book, indicates what one must be aware of. So we are now at an inflection point. And as I see it, there's a difference here. There are two schools of thought. One is what David has been suggesting, and that is that technology is going to evolve and its impact is going to be immense. Now, the question is, do human beings control that evolution? Or, as some suggest, well, we're going to have a really smart machine and we're going to give everything over to the smart machine. And they say, well, we can't do that because, it might go crazy. And so what they propose is putting certain limitations on the machine, and whether that would be successful, I don't know. But if humans have control of this process from the very beginning, then I think we have a better chance of, as I put it, surviving as a planet, at least until the second law of thermo decides that we are doomed, and there is absolute death for the Earth. Now, whether we escape to some other planet is way beyond my pay rank. So, on the other hand, Tony, who actually presented a very practical way, actually, I think the issues which he laid down and the plan he sort of put before us is, if we are to make some progress in this direction, we do have to have exposure to the public, and it has to be in the form of politics, because that's where we have a chance of getting some popular support from the voting public. So I would encourage that kind of going forward. It's a good corporate plan that Tony has laid out. It's got good, what I'll call, capitalist elements to it. It's the way you go forward in creating a business. And while this is not a business, it's going to be a big challenge, because unfortunately, the body politic is not well educated, and it has not been well educated for a long time. When I went to school as a kid, we had something called civics course. We learned how the government works. That's not a course in America at the moment. And while there are groups pushing specific individual initiatives, you and I might agree that, let's say, climate change should be put at the top of our concern list, but that's something for us to work out with the group that we're going to, that I hope gets some traction as a result of this. Being in America, I'm not quite sure how I can help with the London election. And also, I strongly believe that the system we should have chosen in America was the parliamentary system, and not the system we have, because it's now led to almost totally inactivity. So I've made my point, and I will be available if I can be of any help.
Well, I'll certainly appreciate your help and your wisdom. You may see things differently from us in the UK because you're immersed in a different political system, but I'm sure there are some ways in which we can help and inspire each other, and that would be very welcome. In terms of escaping to other planets, that's part of the cosmist vision. You know that we are looking in due course to moving beyond the Earth.
I hate to throw a little cold water on this, but in New York City, there has been a political party way at the fringe. It's called the People's Party or some name like that. And in the primaries, they do get some, there's usually a different candidate who is put forward, and they do get some votes. But when it comes down to the actual election, the primary party in the city convinces all those who voted for that primary to switch over to their candidate, because otherwise the competing candidate is going to be terrible for the city. So it has existed for a long time, and it hasn't really, it's what it proposes makes some sense in many instances, but it's really not have a lot of success. So what I suggest is whatever happens, you've got to be patient, and you've got to keep working at it until you get into the minds of the body politic. That's a tough road to go.
I agree with what you just said, Gordon. I think it's something that, David, that the transhuman movement, party, group, whatever we define ourselves as at some point, we'll have to focus on quite strongly as a tactical approach to begin with, because what Gordon has just described is exactly what, say, the Green Party has suffered from for many years politically, which is that everybody thinks it's a great idea. Some people even vote Green locally, But when it comes to the main election, in Britain, they'll vote Labour or Conservative. They'll think, well, they'll vote for the, yeah, but you're just wasting your vote. And I think that what Gordon just said is pretty much the same in the US, that locally they may have a difference, but when it comes to the presidential elections, you're either Republican or you're Democrat. And actually, we've now reached a point in history where both those systems have evolved to a point where they essentially nullify one another. In Britain, they're just disconnected from reality. In America, they can actually stop the government working, you know, not put through the money even to pay their own wages if they choose not to. I'm no expert in all of this, by the way. I'm only drawing on what I read and how I understand it. But it seems to me that again, there's an element there that somehow if we can articulate it right, we could open the door to a fresh approach, which can resonate with people. And because really, most of the others, frankly, are busted flushes and we're not getting anywhere. And nobody really buys the kind of, we'll be carbon neutral in Britain by 2030. Well, maybe 2050. But anyway, mainly, we're definitely going that way. It means absolutely nothing. They simply came on the television and said, next week, everybody spend £1 and plant a tree. Just one tree, all of you £1. I mean, you could you know, that simple message could actually make a real difference. And there's nothing to swallow. There's no religion or politics involved, no racialism involved, just simply one straightforward. Why not just do that? Have a day out with the children, plant a tree, spend £1. Why don't they just do that? We can't even do simple things like that. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm again simplifying, but essentially we need to understand that that sort of message, I believe, would connect much more directly with people than with people talking about, you know, third fiscal quarter, our GDP has gone up 3 basis points and do I really care? I mean, you're making my children happier. Is the world they're going to inherit getting any better? So there are things here that if we were going to change anything, I think now is a good time. And I go back to Tony's point that actually, if you look at Macron, look at Obama, look at the tactical use without getting over crazy about it, but the tactical use of social media joined to general media like television programming could be very, very effective. Just need to work on homework to put all that together.
I would like to link to what David was saying about the fate of the Green Party, that we do not make the same mistake. We have to be realist and pragmatist. Look what happened in Germany. Just as we speak, they almost certainly will be in the government. And we have to essentially repeat the best approaches worldwide, which enable very little, almost unknown parties to get into the government. Therefore, I would suggest that our policies should be like a funnel that takes all those policies that David mentions as the opener, and then sift them through and narrow them into a tiny tube of policies that would make into the manifesto. And we will have roughly 3 years to discuss how it may be done and which policies deserve or have support of the public, because we will have to test this support of the general public, because what it means, what it matters is whether we will get the mayor into the mayoral seat or not. That is the success criteria. Saying that, I immediately link to what David Wood was saying, that even if we do not win the elections, the sheer fact that the transhumanists will be on the agenda, so to speak, on the more progressive press, or even in wider media, will be a success in itself. I would think that, and I'm not sure, David, how you want to continue this, or whether you have a current plan of the next actions over the next few months. But I think there should be a kind of a schedule that those who are to support this mayoral campaign should be engaged in, say, monthly Zoom meetings where we can discuss policies and concrete steps, advise each other on what has been done, who have we contacted, any new sponsors, how to arrange the financial campaigns, and so on.
And does some of your existing infrastructure, the ones that you were talking about earlier, the ones that are hosting services for some of the European Agora, are they able to support a discussion, an online discussion amongst the people who...
Straight away, yeah, it can be done straight away. The only problem is to maintain it. There always must be a moderator that moderates at least once a day how the questions or policies are being narrated, so that you see through any pranksters, and they could be pranksters, and also at the end of, say, a certain period, say every few months, you gather those policies which gain 60% support, and you put them into a kind of consolidated report. The other point, but this is nice to have, would be to make it, in quotes, our own tool with the help of AI. So make it even better than it is, because it is based on sophisticated statistics. The underlying, the whole thing consists of two sub-products. One is our digital content management, which we have devised, and the other one is the so-called police debating system developed in America in 2012, and which has been used worldwide to a lesser degree. So we have combined it with much more manageable and user-friendly interface, but it still needs volunteers to support it day by day and improve it. And if we can improve it in such a way that we adopt AI, and it is possible using, for instance, GPT-3, then we would make something really, really fantastic as a kind of a byproduct that can be marketed almost by the transhumanists for others to use as well.
I'm slightly cautious as to how much AI will be able to help us straight away, but I'm open-minded if somebody can show us that it actually can do a better job. I'm confident that there will be enough people in the general community to act as volunteer moderators, so that I look forward to. Let's discuss, you and I, Tony, by email afterwards, and set something up and let people know about it.
I'll make one more final summary. I would, if we have a proposition at the end of this meeting, what I propose is that, and I would say Tony and David, and perhaps one or two other people, if you want, there should be steps now to form this organization, to identify, if possible, first of all, a board and a point at which they could meet, and therefore decide how to go forward on a practical basis, on a real basis. Because I think in trying this in London in a mayoral election is an excellent idea. It's a reasonably small endeavor. It's not worldwide, which would require a whole different approach. And so we would need to identify possibly some candidate who would be willing to embrace this.
Absolutely. We need to make that organizational step.
Just respectfully asked to repost those links in the chat. I was disconnected, so I lost some of that. And then also I'd like to throw in just a pitch, so to speak, for the U.S. Transhumanist Party. I know most of the audience is probably in the UK, but we do discuss some interesting ideas Sunday afternoon U.S. time, so that's probably later in the evening for you. But it's worthwhile, and I will send a link in a moment.
Myself, I am a kind of bridge between a number of different countries in terms of being involved in paying attention to the future of politics. Because the president of politics in all the countries I follow, except for boring Canada, thank goodness, is a bit bonkers, to say the least. So I invite everyone over and we can talk about these things, and or maybe I did have an important question. Reforming society, comparative governance. Comparative governance across the wide world may be an easy task to see where we can see where things are just normally incompetent and where things are a little more malevolent. shall we say, like malware-wise, as it were, in governance as opposed to networks.
That's
All right.
part of
Thank
measuring.
you.
That's part of measuring what we're doing. It's part of the index of human social flourishing, perhaps, possibly, that we are aware of things potentially going wrong.
I really just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that I said in the Q&A window, which has now disappeared in my context. Essentially, I agree with the strategy that it's a good idea to make the best use of the better voting systems in local elections as a way of getting raising awareness of the policies that we think are going to promote human flourishing. I think my main concern is that the agenda, the list of policies as it is currently presented is quite sort of national or global in nature rather than with a local emphasis. So I'd probably kind of turn it upside down and make sure that it's relevant to the issues that will arise in local elections. And the other aspect of that is that we need to promote collaborative politics. And maybe a good way of doing that is to seek in each local election those other candidates that are willing to collaborate and make sure that the way our policies are presented are in alignment with theirs and vice versa. That may risk losing our £10,000 deposit on the basis that it might turn out to be strategically useful to promote another candidate that is likely to gain more influence with a similar set of policies.
All wise, thoughtful comments. Quite right. I don't have anything profound to say about this, but in each case, a lot of hard work lies ahead. These things should definitely be on the table. Thank you. Mary?
Well, I'm really impressed with all this. I haven't got time to put into it because I'm running around trying to support Let's groups all over the place, and there aren't enough of me. But the one scary thing that keeps coming into my mind is that it is very scary that when you talk about technical things, I keep thinking of the way the Chinese have got everybody taped, and all these things like controlling people's behavior by rewarding them, and I think that if anybody thought that this was the kind of thing you were going to do, they wouldn't support it. So I think it's really important to make it clear that you're not going for that kind of scenario. Do you understand what I'm on about?
I do understand, and that's why policy 2 says we're not going to be a smart city, we're going to be a trusted city, a safe city. This surveillance is not to manipulate people or constrain us or confuse us or manipulate us, it's there to empower citizens. I even had that as policy number 1 for a while, and I swapped it around with the other policy, but that is a real concern, and we're probably going to have to talk about it a great deal.
Yeah.
And the way to answer it is not to have this in the power of a closed, opaque group, but as something that is under democratic inspection. So it doesn't mean each person will understand it, but there'll be enough people who look at it and say, you know what, I think this is all right for the time being. And although you're too busy to operate fully in this, I'm sure you'll be able occasionally to mention it to other people, and people who are maybe less busy than you in your circles, maybe will come along your links and find out about this from us.
Yes, yes, indeed, yeah.
Final remarks from anybody? So let me say at the end that politics is the art of the possible. We have more possibilities with city elections than elsewhere, for much the same reasons that the Greens in Germany have done so much better than the Greens in the UK. I personally think that the first past the post voting system was all that was possible for a while. It is archaic. It's by no means the best we can do. And there is a campaign to change it. is gathering momentum, but it hasn't gone far enough yet. And so we have to take advantage of it where we can. The Greens reached power, first of all, in Germany, in many of the provinces. I forget what they're called in Germany, the federal regions, states. Now they are reaching influence nationally. In the UK, the Greens did quite well in the EU elections, which had a proportional representation and multi-MEP constituencies. And arguably, one reason they've done so well in London last time, coming into third position, is because of the alternative vote system. So many people would say, well, you know, I'm not going to have my vote wasted. I will vote for the Greens. And in case they aren't in the top two, then I'm going to vote for this other one to stop these other guys over there coming in power, because I really dislike them being in power. And so let's use that same opportunity ourselves. So we might end up with a lot more votes. But to do that, we are going to have to sharpen up our policies, sharpen up how we present them. We're going to need to find ways of talking about them that draw, engage people, inspire them, and don't frighten them. And that's the work going on from now. So I'm going to shut down the recording. I'm going to pause the live streaming and thank everybody for being brave enough to come on stage, and look forward to rolling our collective sleeves up and each of us finding how we can, in various ways, help this possibility to kickstart a better politics that is more aware of the changes ahead from technology and is more able, therefore, to take the right decisions to steer that for our positive good. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.